Very good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. Um, Today, we're going to talk about the depth of the human mind, how that helps us understand ourselves and also understand other people. People have tendency to try to understand other people because that's a safe way of looking at life. But the difficult part is how to understand ourselves, how to go deeper and deeper and deeper in our mind to reach the core aspects of our personality and our motives. If you go and continue to peel the onion, peel the onion, peel the onion, peel the onion to go to the core of the onion, you're going to find surprisingly that all human experience throughout the last millions of years is similar. Carl Gustav Jung, many years ago, talked about the collective unconscious, that there is a personal unconscious, there is a collective unconscious, that our genetic makeup, our genes, our DNA, program us to have even before we are born. So who you are is made to a great extent, and we know that now by this kind of a mixture of genes that create your brain and program your brain in a way. And we're all born with this predisposition to be able to survive. And we tend to be selfish, and we tend to be self centered, and we seek survival. And from that came our cooperation with others to create societies, to create morality, to create systems of living that we see and we have been seeing throughout the last hundreds of thousands of years since our ancestors, the hunter gatherers, sat together and decided to have small cities and towns because they realize that to cooperate together that has benefit to each one of the group. Um, that the whole is and the sum of the groups. We all know that. So the title of the video today is that there's always a story behind the story. And I always tell my students that what is the real story? There's always a story behind the story. The story we tell is how we communicate with each other now. What's the story behind my story? Why did I decide to come up with this video today? That's the story behind the story. And for all of us, there is always a layer. If we go back, we're going to find a different story. Sometimes the original story is totally the opposite of what you see in front of you. So sometimes what you see in front of you is anger, and the real story is fear. And sometimes the what you see in front of you is hate, and behind that is love. And sometimes the opposite. There is the outside layer of love, behind it there is an inner layer of hate behind the outer layer of love. There is always this dynamic interaction that we do not prefer to show our inner motive. Not only that, sometimes we have no access at all to our inner motives, and others are the same. So, if you want to develop insight and understand yourself better, forget about others for a while. We always focus on others, focus on ourselves. We have to always ask yourself when you do something or when you don't do something, ask yourself, what's the real story here? The real story could be totally different from what your brain, what your sensations tell you. And the people who have access to their inner aspects of their personality, the inner core of their personality, they have better ability to know the real story. And in many cases, the real story is painful. The real story is not very pleasant, and we don't want to face it. And the concept of insight, the definition of insight, is the ability to understand the conscious and unconscious motives behind your behavior. So if you want to mature, to be at a higher level of understanding yourself and others in life, is to be able to go deeper and understand the inner aspects of your personality. And that how deep you can go, it varies from one person to another. If the more traumatized we are as children, the more traumatized we were as even as adults. We put a block, we put a layer, an armor around that past, and we don't easily access that. And the earlier the trauma, the more difficult it is to access your past. So it's a process of struggle to reach your inner self. It's a process to struggle to reach your true self inside you. Okay? And what's the next step after you access it and you know it, is to accept it as it is. To accept the real story, to accept your weakness, to accept your insecurity, to accept the fact that you might be threatened by others, to accept the fact that you're too needy sometimes for the love and care of the others, and to accept that. And then after that, so it's knowledge, number one, and how to access and know yourself. Number two, after you access that, you have to accept it. And it's going to be a radical acceptance of who you are. That's the difficult part. So to understand and accept the real story. And that real story comes from your past experiences. And we all have these experiences in the past that we do not accept, and we're not proud of, and we feel guilty about, and we are ashamed that we have done this or this will happen to us. How to reach that moment of radical acceptance. Not to accept the good story, no, not to accept your success. We always focus on this positive psychology and how to be positive and how to push yourself. That's all good. But there is another part that you have to accept. You have to accept that you are human and your real story is not perfect. So don't try to be perfect on the surface. And this is true for all humans. So when you see somebody doing something good or bad, always realize that's not the real story. There's a story behind it. If you see somebody who's very giving and very caring and very altruistic, there may be another story behind it. If you see somebody who's look very happy on the surface, who have a sense of humor, who laughs all the time, who's a comedian, don't be surprised if you see that comedian who looked very happy on the surface. At some point, you realize that how depressed he was. And we have seen examples of after many years of comedy, we see people committing suicide. Why do people do that? Because there was a story behind the story. And if you want to understand the human nature, whether it's you or others, or realize, don't be naive to look at the superficial layer of people's behaviors and emotions and thoughts and what even their morality on the outside. Some people have pseudo morality, and we can have pseudo morality. It's a morality that serves a purpose, and that purpose might not be as moral as it looks. So you can have pseudo morality or pseudo religiosity. Don't be naive. And always remember that you and others have a story behind the story. If you go deeper and work on yourself and realize that you as human being have your own issues, have your own mess. And I always tell my patient, I want you to love your mess and move on. Love your mess. Just you, that's who you are. Love the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful, everything inside you. Accept it. Again, radical acceptance of who you are. Is it easy? No. Is it painful? Yes. Does the guilt, the shame comes out every now and then and irritate us and bite us? Yes, it will. It will come. But you have to always remind yourself that we all, as human beings, have that shared experience, whatever you want to call it, that these experiences come from our nature, that creatures came and put on earth after separating from the mother's womb to survive. We're trying to survive. We're trying to survive physically. We're trying to survive emotionally. We're trying to survive mentally in the world. We need to be accepted. We need to be loved. We need to be cared for. That's what we need. Sometimes it doesn't happen. So that's why our genes put us into that situation. These are the basic needs of the humans. In many occasions, we fight, we find, and we end up with a challenge, we end up with a conflict with somebody else who has the same basic needs like us. So two basic needs are facing each other in relationship. What does that result in? Sometimes it results in good outcome, and many occasions those two needs conflict with each other. How do we deal with that? How to get the best outcome in a relationship? You have to understand that we are by our nature. There's another layer that you don't see. If the way you see yourself is very superficial and you don't go deeper into yourself, what will happen is that you're going to see the people the same way like you see yourself. And you'll end up from one trap into another because you don't see. You'll get deceived easily by people. And I want you to stop seeing people as either good or bad. Stop doing that. And it is better to see people as humans with some needs. That's it. So when you see a person in front of you, don't label them the good people or the bad. If you do that, if you always label people the good and the bad, and you always look for the good and you avoid the bad people, this kind of splitting, dichotomous thinking, it indicates that you have a split inside you, that you have a bad part of you you're not able to access and you're not able to accept. If you accept yourself as a whole, you will be able to accept others as a whole. And the kids who were unable to accept their mothers as a whole, the mother was good at times and bad at times, that splits their mind into the good part and the bad part. You accept yourself as a whole. You forgive your parents, as we mentioned before. Very important. Forgive your parents and move on. Your parents were not perfect. Humans are not perfect. They tried their best, and you move on after that. That process of acceptance and agreeing that this is part of life, that you have to metabolize it. Like when you eat food and you metabolize, it becomes part of you, becomes flesh and skin and muscles and brain cells and bones. That's called the process of metabolism. There is a similar process to that called thought metabolism. which is you take the thought that I'm telling you now and you metabolize it. That thought will become part of who you are. So the word acceptance, or the word radical acceptance, it's not a word. You take it and you eat it and becomes part of you. If you accept yourself, you're going to find that the world is not as bad as you thought. If you avoid the splitting inside you, you will see the world, the gray area of life. The people who are unable to see the gray area of life and they tend to split, this is because there is an inner splitting inside them, because also the splitting comes from the past. So the real story, what's the real story behind that? The real story behind that is the relationship with the mom and dad. How you could not incorporate the good mother and the bad mother into one person and forgive her for what she did. And you always see the mother is either very loving and caring or very punishing. And the unpredictable mothers are very powerful in creating this phenomena. So if you have young kids, try to be predictable. Try to be predictable. The child that does the same thing, and one time he gets a reaction, and the next time he gets another reaction, and sometimes the other reaction is violent. That's very dangerous to our brains. Our brains cannot take that. Consistency is very important in raising kids. Try to be consistent. Try to control yourself. Try to be consistent in your interaction with your kids. So the real story is what you need to look for, not in others, which we all try to find, which we can easily find, by the way. You can easily find the story behind the story in others. Yes. It's very difficult to find the story behind the stories inside you. So behind an angry person, there is a crying child. That's the real story. So people in relationships, if you want to improve your relationship with your partner, realize that behind an angry person, a crying, afraid child. Either you deal with the angry person, if you're smarter, very early in the relationship, you understand that. So you're dealing with the child that's crying and afraid, may be threatened by you. Maybe you are threatening, and many women are threatening men. You can see this big muscular man threatened by a woman. You tell me how? We see it all the time. They don't say it. So what does that threat lead to? Lead to violence. So you see this angry, violent men, mainly because they are afraid. So the anger, the violence is a protection against that fear inside you. Fear of annihilation, fear of castration, the basic fears of humans. It appears on the surface as a totally different story. That story might be totally the opposite. So you always, when you do that, of course, in social situations and in legal situations, we don't care too much about the motives. If you do something wrong, we always look at the behavior. Nobody will excuse you for the behavior based on the motive. Some judges do that. Some judges decrease the sentence because of what's underneath, what the real story was. And we see that in courts. We see that in the legal system. But in social situations, in general, we don't do that. And I hope we will try to understand that when we deal with, especially with people who are closer to us. People who are closer to us, we understand also there is always a story behind the story, and look for that story. When you look for that story, please don't do it in a judgmental way. I want you to do it a very empathic way, that we're all in the same boat. People can easily do it in a judgmental way. No, I want you to say that I am like anybody else. And we all that have inner story that we are not proud of. We all have that inner story that we are guilty, feeling guilty, that we are ashamed. That's what it is. We all have that story. And if you are aware of yourself, accepting yourself, you will be easily able to empathize, to understand, to even change other people's stories if you can, if that person is important to you. So you're able to change the person's behavior by understanding the real story. So smart people, and that might be part of emotional intelligence. Remember, we spoke in previous video about the definition of emotional intelligence, and I'm repeating it here for people who did not hear it in previous videos, is that emotional intelligence simply means four components. Four components. Number one, to understand your own emotions. Emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence. Sometimes they call it social intelligence. So you understand your own emotions. You're smart. Your emotions are smart. You understand your emotions well. You perceive them the right way. The meaning of your emotions you're fully aware of. Also, because of that, you're able to change them. So when you get angry, you're going to say, I'm not angry. I am threatened. I shouldn't be threatened. You calm down, simply. Or I'm not hateful. I am needy and I'm not getting what I want. So this hatefulness is a reaction to my neediness. And I need to work on my neediness so I will be less hateful or less envious of others. That's the two that belong to you. Then you're able to do the same thing with others. Read people's emotions the right way, able to read other people's emotions, and also be able to manage other people's emotions if you can. So when you are in a social setting, in a relationship, on the job, you're able to read what's going on around you and be able to deal with it based on your intelligent reading of others. So you can read yourself intelligently, you can read others intelligently, and able to interact in the right way within yourself and with others. And that's the definition of emotional intelligence. And that these are the people who are successful in life. It's not the IQ. It's not your IQ is 150 or 170. No, it's the emotional Q. It's the emotional Q. So the EQ, not the IQ, not the intelligence, not the ability to answer questions. So if you are able to read yourself, you'll be better able to read others. And also, you will be better able to protect yourself from others. So if you look at the outside story, you're going to be like the majority of people on this earth. The majority of people, they interact superficially with each other. If you have a deeper understanding of the human nature, you go deeper, 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 deeper. You always ask yourself, what's the real story? What's the real story behind this story, behind what happened? And you try to understand it, and you try to figure it out and deal with it in a way that is beneficial to you and to the other person, and that improves your relationship with others. It's not going to happen unless you understand yourself and accept yourself and resolve the conflicts from the past. If you can do it on your own, that's fine. If you cannot do it, then seek help. Seek help from a therapist or a psychiatrist, and try to understand that you improve by this kind of healthy interaction with another human being. Can you do that on your own? If you can, that's fine. But it is better if done within a therapist. And because the therapist will have a different perspective, will be a neutral person who can reflect to you, will be like your mirror. especially if you trust your therapist and if your therapist is good. So what I want you to get from this video, that what you see on the surface is not the real story. Emotionally intelligent people realize that, and while doing that, you don't judge people and you always ask yourself, oh, there's something bad behind this. No, there's something bad behind you as well. You see it. You develop more empathy. You develop more ability to care. You develop more ability to understand the human experience, the collective unconscious, that we are all in the same boat. Since our ancestors that were living 200,000-300,000 years ago, if you are able to understand that and process it right, you will be better able to deal with yourself and with others. That collective unconscious, you can see it in cultures. You can see how people in different cultures, where there was no communication, ask yourself why there are pyramids in Egypt and there are pyramids in Mexico and there are pyramids in Peru and there are pyramids in Guatemala and there are pyramids in Sudan. Did these people talk to each other and came up with this idea, we're going to build pyramids to bury our kings and queens? That's exactly what collective unconscious, that people who were completely separated geographically, they end up with the same conclusion, that they want to reach the sky by these pyramids, by building pyramids. And if you look at pyramids in the world, you're going to find them you talk about 5,000-7,000 years ago, and everybody built pyramids. Why is that? Why did people build pyramids? That's the collective unconscious. That's the collective cultural experience, that the genetic programming that we're all built with, the DNA that we share from our ancestors, programmed our brain certain way, programmed our brain to have cognitive bias to protect us, to realizing that what you see in front of you is not the reality, is your own perception of reality. That your assumptions might be wrong. There's always a different story. And I made a video about a few months ago that assumptions can destroy your life. People who understand that what's assumption, the story in your head might not be the real story. The thoughts in your head might not be the real story. The story in front of you might not be the real story. So you always question and question and question your own perceptions, your own feelings, because they might be wrong. Because these layers we spoke about. So the people who are able to understand themselves at a deeper level and see these layers, understand who we are, what are we formed of, and how our brain works, you develop this ultimate humility. And you see the shared experience between you and somebody different, way away from you, somewhere else in the world. It's the same experience. It's the same experience. And people ask me, how are you a psychiatrist in America and you grew up in Egypt? I always tell people, actually, that's very enriching. For me, psychiatrist in America is very enriching. And I realized after a quarter century of practicing psychiatry in America that human experience is the same. It doesn't matter. And I treated people from all over the world, different ethnic backgrounds, different cultures, different religions, different ages, different genders, different experiences in life, different socioeconomic status. And what's the common experience? We're all humans. We're all humans. It doesn't matter where you're from or who you're treating. Once you understand, once you're able to communicate with the person in some sort of language, Once you're able to communicate, you realize that whether the person in front of you is from China, Russia, Portland, Oregon, Kigali in Africa, or Berlin, Germany, same experience. That I truly believe in this kind of collective unconscious that's there, that human experience that's there. People need to live and survive and be loved and cared for. Just the culture paints different picture in front of you. If you bypass all these layers, you're gonna find the same person inside you. Whether you're dealing with the CEO of a big company or the cleaning lady in the office, the same experience. And believe me, after many years, I realized that that's exactly, we're all struggle with these inner needs. Yes, that's all the same. So if your culture promotes this sense of superiority, I humbly request you to reassess that. If your culture promotes some sort of this kind of splitting, I respectfully ask you to reassess that. And that's by itself, this cultural superiority and this kind of splitting of the world into the good, the bad, is a defense against your own inner conflict inside you. So if you believe that you're better than anybody else, if you believe your culture, your religion, your education is better than anybody else, I humbly and respectfully ask you to reassess your thoughts, because that's not how the world works. And I caution you that that layer you cover yourself with, you think you're right, might be a defense. That's not the real story. That's the story on the outside that you protect yourself with, because you don't want to deal with your inner demons. You have to get rid of your inner demons. You have to get rid of your inner evil. And at that point, you will realize that we're all humans are the same. We're all humans are the same. We're born with, we did not choose your genes, we did not choose our parents, we did not choose our culture, we did not choose our religion, we did not choose our circumstances. And by age 3 to 6, the majority of your mind and the majority of your brain have already formed. And what will happen after that? You struggle to correct it, or you struggle to mess it up more based on the past. So the genetic determinism, the cultural determinism, the psychological determinism, all of those together, if you put them together, will create a big part of who you are. And then what will happen after that? You live all your life trying to correct what was instilled in you, what was imposed on you, what was programmed in your head that you did not choose, and you did not ask to have it this way or another. You did not have a choice at all. That's who we are. If you understand yourself and others this way, you're going to be more peaceful, you're going to be calmer, you're going to be more accepting of others because you already accepted yourself. Always look at that. If you understand yourself better, you will be better able to understand others, deal with people, empathize with people, know exactly where they are coming from. And if the real story, if the story behind the story of the person in front of you is very painful, you will be able to sympathize and empathize with that, because you also have a similar painful story that you dealt with. That might be a different framework to understand ourselves and understand others. And maybe, I hope, we have a better relationship within ourselves. Better, I always stress on, that's the most important part, is to have better relationship with yourself, to accept yourself for who you are. When you're able to do that, the rest will be easy, believe me. I hope this is useful. Thanks a lot for your watching. Thanks a lot for your continued support, and I hope you will subscribe to the channel if you like it, and also share the video for your friends and families. And I hope to see you next week in another video. You guys take care. Bye-bye.